Welcome back to the Cozy Cottage Homestead. Today I'm going to be sharing with y'all some of my sour starter tips. Some are going to be completely surprised that this process would even work. Others that are master chefs are going to be like, there's no way that this chick can be saying that this works because you have to do this, and that. You have to measure it precisely. You have to get out just a little bit to make sure you have the proper amount of grams, and so on and so forth. So after years and years and years of watching many videos and reading many books in depth, in detail, and the science behind all of it and how it actually works, I decided I would do it the way I thought would work best for me, and done several science experiments to see which method worked the best for me. And being with the mindset of doing things the old-fashioned way, I wanted to be able to do it the way they used to do it in the Western cultures when they had the horse and wagon trains, and they traveled around the United States and then in other countries. Since the Bible, since the beginning and before the Bible times, people had sourdough bread. And what were they missing? What was one thing that we have that they did not have? I'm sure some of you already figured out what the answer is a refrigerator. So I thought, well, if they could travel around all over and keep a little thing of sourdough in a little sack or in a pouch, and then stick it in their barrel of flour and travel with it all over the place, why do we have to stick our sourdough starter in the refrigerator? Well, so I tried it both ways and absolutely loved doing it the old-fashioned way without sticking my sourdough starter in the refrigerator, with having the mindset of, what if we don't have electricity? Will I still be able to provide something for my family to eat? And like the Bible says, man can't live by bread alone. So I thought about that, and I decided to just try it my own way and see how it worked. So I'm just going to read you some of my tips and some different things that I wrote down. It's going to be in just all kind of different array of orders. Just some of my notes. I guess I could have got my notes together better and put them in order so you would understand. Either at the end of this video, or I'll make another video, I'll show the steps and the details. I made little index cards / recipe cards with the notes on it, and then me feeding the starter and going through the process. So that will either be on this video or it'll be another video. And then after we make the sourdough starter, I'll do a couple of recipes throughout the next week showing you how I use my starter and how you can use your starter too. So the first thing that I wrote down was, don't feed your starter before you take out a half a cup for your bread recipe. Okay, so like whenever I make 2 loaves of bread, I use 1 cup of starter. If I use 1 loaf of bread, I use a half a cup. So what this is saying is, so the night before, say I just got my starter down and I want to make bread, don't feed it first. Stir it up and then measure out your half a cup or 1 cup, whatever your recipe calls for, and then start your recipe. And after you get done with your recipe, then come back and feed your starter, and then set it back in your warm spot. This is the Elsie starter. She's the one I've had alive for about, I think I said 6 months, but I think it's more like 4 months, something like that. But this is the one I'll be making my bread from, because this one is still immature and not ready. But this is the one that I'm using for an example on how you can start your bread. So the next morning, if you want to make bread, or the night before, my recipe is really simple. You make it the night before. And use your starter and then feed it afterwards. Don't feed it before. So you feed your starter after you make your bread. And it depends on feeding the starter. It's a process. When you first start it, you use a half a cup for 3 days, and then you go down to a 1/4 of a cup, and then you go back to a half a cup. So it just depends. Some people like their dough, their starter, a little like thinner and some like it a little thicker. I tend to like mine a little thicker, so I don't always add all the water that is required depending on the consistency of my starter. So always make sure if you start with a small batch, I've decided to go with a small batch because I really don't need to make more than, say, 4 loaves of bread a week. That's more than enough bread for us, and we eat one throughout a couple of days and we freeze the other loaf, so that method's been working really well. If you make bread every day, just make sure you save at least a half a cup of your starter so that you'll have enough to keep going and keep the starter alive. And some people have been keeping starters alive for like thousands of years. It's just unbelievable how amazing the sourdough starter can just keep going and going and going and going. So that's been my plan, was to keep my sourdough starter going as long as I can. Again, before we had electricity, before we kept our houses at a comfortable temperature, how did they keep their starter alive if they did not have a refrigerator? So I've tested the waters, and I've been doing it over the last 4 or 5 months now to see how cold it could get in here before my starter quit acting active. The cold never hurt it. And the heat, as long as it doesn't get over 85 degrees in your house, it didn't hurt it. So between 60 and 85, your starter's going to do fine. There's absolutely, and I'm going to say it and you're going to be shocked, no reason for you to have to put your starter in the refrigerator unless, and I'll tell you about the unless here in a few minutes, so that you don't want to kill your starter. So I keep it on top of my freezer. It seems to be the warmest place. Back in the old days, in the Western culture, people would keep it by the fireplace or by the fire to keep it warm so that it would keep incubating and fermenting overnight. So actually, the warmer it stays, the better I think it does. So for the first 7 days, you're going to feed your starter. And that's how you start your starter. I'll go over my index cards with you, but I'm also going to show you a visual of all of the steps. I'll go through it pretty fast because, like I said, I'm going to also have another video where I show you actually feeding it and going through the process. And this is just how I do it. There are tons and tons and tons of content and information, much of which I found to be quite confusing and intimidating because it had to be precise and perfect. Well, I'm here to tell you, I've been making sourdough bread for a while now, and my sourdough bread has been just wonderful, and not once have I weighed anything or specifically measured anything, and my bread has turned out beautiful. So day 1, you're going to start your starter. You're going to be brave. You're going to go ahead and give it a try. So day 1, you want to start with the mason jar. Quart size. If you want to make a larger batch, you can double or triple this depending on how much bread you need for your family. But this works fine for me. You could actually make 1 or 2 loaves of bread every single day using this method. So day 1, a half a cup of whole wheat flour. That's the only thing special about this. The first day is whole wheat flour. And a half a cup of water. And you want it to be unchlorinated water. So you want it to be not chemical treated. The chlorine in the water will kill your yeast in your bread dough or your flour, and then your starter won't be active. So that's why they tell you to use water that's not been chemically treated, preferably without chlorine. So well water usually works just fine. Rainwater, potato water, spring water, anything that's not chlorinated. But the trick here is just on day 1, you have to have the unbleached whole wheat flour. And then after that, you can feed it with whatever kind of flour you have. Day 2, a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water. It's going to seem like it's a little runny, but just let it keep going and let it set back in its warm space overnight. And I used the white flour after the first day. Day 3, you're going to discard about half of your sourdough starter. You can measure it out if you want to. I just dump some of it out and eyeball it. If it looks about half down, then I'm good. I don't measure it, and I can't see where it's made a difference when I did go through all the trouble of measuring every single gram. So after you discard about half of it, you're going to add back 1/2 of a cup of flour and about 1/2 to 1/4 of a cup of water. This is where it gets a little tricky. I like my sourdough starter a little bit thicker, so I usually add a little bit less than 1/2 cup of water. Day 4 is 1/4, make sure you make a note of this, 1/4 of a cup of flour and 1/4 of a cup of water. So we're making it a little bit less. We're decreasing the amount just a little bit because we don't want it to ferment and come out of our jar, because we know about how much we're going to need for what we need to make bread with every day. If you want to go with the 1/2 cup, then go ahead and make a bigger batch. But to me, it's harder to keep this sourdough starter fresh if my batch keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then say if I don't make bread, you have to keep feeding it. So it's just a lot more manageable for me to do it in a smaller batch. Day 5, same thing, 1/4 of a cup of flour, 1/4 of a cup of water. Day 6, discard about 1/4 of the starter, so not half of it, but about 1/4, just a little bit of it. And then you're going to add back 1/4 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water. Day 7, same thing, 1/4 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of water. Day 8, so day 7 was her last day of all of her hard work. She got the rest on day 7. All we did was feed her, made her comfortable. So day 8, you're ready to bake with the sourdough starter. I know, some people go for weeks before they think the sourdough starter is ready to be mature enough to bake with. I've tried it several different ways, and from my experiment, I found that on day 8, she was perfectly healthy and ready to go. So after day 8, I would take out my 1/2 cup or 1 cup of starter and make my bread, and then I would feed her that night 1/4 of a cup of flour and 1/4 of a cup of water. And then I would just keep that process going. Then the next day, I'm going to be discarding some because I'm going to be using that discard as my sourdough starter to make my bread, so that it keeps the volume going. It keeps it down to where it's not overflowing. So every day or every other day, I'm baking bread. So I never get it so full that it's bubbling out the top. Now this one is already ready. I'm going to be making bread tonight with it because it's time to go ahead and make bread, because I've fed her 2 days in a row. I wasn't able to make the bread, so I have to do it tonight so that I don't destroy this sourdough starter. I could discard and throw it away, but that seems pointless, because why would I want to do that when I could go ahead and make bread? So I have to do that tonight. So that's all the steps, and I never put it in the refrigerator. So what I was going to say about that was unless. So unless I know I am not feeling good, then I will use the luxury of the refrigerator. So say I'm having a medical procedure done and I'm going to be out for like 3 or 4 days. I'm not going to be feeling like making bread. Or say you have to go out of town for a business trip or traveling, whatever. Then you would have the luxury and the blessing of the refrigerator. So you would put your sourdough starter in the refrigerator because it slows down the fermenting process. She won't be as hungry. And then you can put her in there for, I don't know, say 5 to 7 days if you had to without feeding her. And that would give you a little bit of a break. But if you didn't have that luxury, then you would feed, discard, just keep feeding and discarding every other day. But if you had the refrigerator, it will give you a little bit of a break from having to feed her every day. And this is another thing that some people are not aware of. So my sourdough starter here is all like one color. And this is a weird word that they use, and I think I get why, but it gets an amber liquid on top, say if you forgot to feed it for a day or two, and that liquid is called a hooch. So it reminds me of being a kid saying people were hoochie mamas. So all that means is your sourdough starter is hungry. So it's time to feed it. You can stir that in or you can dump it out, whatever makes you happy. Some people think they need to dump it out. I just stir it in and feed it. And then she goes back to her bubbling and her processing and growing and expanding and deflating. And that's just the process of how it works. So she's ready to go right now. She's ready for me to make some bread with her. So I went over not using city water because the chlorine in the city water will kill the natural yeast. So, and the natural yeast is everywhere. Some people think you have to leave the lid completely open so that it can collect the yeast. But the yeast is already in the environment. The yeast is everywhere. It's even on every little speck of flour that you have. So yeast is everywhere. So you don't have to worry about that. Now when you put it in your refrigerator, you do want to go ahead and close it up completely because it's in a cool environment with a lot of other products in your refrigerator that may cause it to spoil. So you don't want it to collect any bad bacteria while it's in your refrigerator, which is kind of sad that we have so much bacteria everywhere. But I guess just the combinations of all the other gases that would be let off from fruits and vegetables and just all kind of stuff in your refrigerator, that it could contaminate your starter. So then you would want to put your lid on tight and close it up while it was in there for those few days until you got back to it. So let's see if I missed anything else. So the longer your sourdough starter you keep it going, of course, the more flavor or the more sour your bread will become. If it ever becomes too sour and you think you don't like it, then keep adding flour to it and water to it and discarding, and it will get lighter and lighter and lighter until you get it to a better flavor. Sometimes it just gets strong because you don't use it as often. So if it becomes too strong, you always have the option to just start over completely, dump out all of your starter except for a little bit, and just keep some of it and keep it going and then restart it. So it does get stronger over time. Now, should you notice any colors besides the amber looking color of the hooch or the color of the flour starter mixture when you first start, if you get any weird purples, oranges, green colors in it, then your sourdough starter has become ill. She has started to collect bad bacteria and causing it to have the wrong kind of germ that is going to spoil your sourdough starter. And always, if in doubt, throw it out. Don't take a chance on getting yourself sick or your family sick and crying over a little sourdough starter. If it don't do right, don't smell right, don't look right, don't worry about it. Start over. It's just that simple. I haven't noticed anything. I know lots of people are really, really, really big on pushing. You've got to have a fresh, clean jar every day, every day. It's got to be exact. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. All I do is scrape it down with my spoon inside my jar. It leaves a little bit of residue on the inside. So far, let's knock on some wood, I haven't had any problems. But let me tell you, if I even suspected something was wrong with my sourdough starter, I would not hesitate to throw it out and start over. It's just flour and just water and wild yeast. You're not really out a whole lot versus your health or your family members getting sick because something was wrong with your sourdough starter. And I'm sure from time to time that will happen. So I usually just scrape it down, wipe it off, and put my coffee filter back on. This little canister here just has a little lid that locks down. I don't lock it, I just leave it open and keep the paper down, just so that it can keep fermenting and getting air. And it is recommended that you use a wooden or plastic spoon. You use whatever you want. I think the metal may react to the fermenting process, like with any metals and stuff, once you get fermenting, which causes like a vinegar. it can react and cause some kind of bacteria to grow in your starter, and we don't want that. I think I have covered everything. Let's see if I missed anything. So after I get my starter established and after the 8 days, I usually feed her every other day. Sometimes I feed her every day. If I see the hooch, the amber liquid on top after the first day, if I notice it, because it's right here where I can look and see it every day. So that's another thing, making sure your sourdough starter is somewhere where you're going to be and you're going to see it every day. If I notice that the amber liquid is on top, which is just the fermented liquid that turns kind of like to an alky, vinegary, some people say beer smell. It's a sourdough smell. Then I will go ahead and feed her. That just simply means that she is hungry and she's ready to be fed. So I would go ahead and feed her. And like I said, if there are days I don't feel like making bread, then I have to discard a little bit and then feed her. And then she's usually good for another day. And then the next day I'll go ahead and make my bread. And I'll go over my sourdough sandwich bread and do a recipe with that, showing y'all how I do it. I think y'all are going to love it. It's a very easy, very simple recipe. And it is so easy that you really want to make it every day. And I'm not even able to feel like making bread every day. But the process is so simple. No kneading for hours and hours and hours like you do the traditional bread. And it's just so easy that you're like, well, why can't I just make it? You already have your sourdough starter. You have to do something with it to keep it going, keep it alive. So it's just very easy because you make it the night before. And it's just simple. I can't wait to share that with y'all. What I've discovered and sharing some information with y'all that's going to help y'all also become excited about making sourdough starter and sourdough bread, pancakes, biscuits, pizza, you name it, whatever you would make for bread in any other area, any other product, that you can use your sourdough starter to make rolls and cornbread. I mean, really, y'all, just about everything. And it's just flour and water and whatever your other ingredients would be for your recipe. So for me, not having to buy commercial yeast is just one more way for me to be frugal. And also being able to make it off-grid, even though I'm not off-grid. Y'all know I like to practice skills that are off-grid so that if ever was the time that we were not able to have electricity, that we still could live our life as comfortably as possible, and we would not have to scramble and worry and wonder about how in the world are we going to do this, how are we going to do that, because we're already getting ourselves conditioned and disciplined and working towards that process. So I think y'all are going to enjoy it. It's worked quite well. It's very simple and very easy. I know there's lots of channels out there. It makes it seem so scary. And you miss one day and you throw it out and then you're scared because it's not going to rise or it's not going to work. It's really, really, seriously, y'all, not that complicated at all. It will work for you if it worked for me. So just be patient and keep trying, keep learning, keep experimenting, and find out what works for you. And as far as the schedule goes, your life, your schedule, your way, it's however you want to do it. It doesn't have to be done at any certain time, day, night, schedule, because some other creator told you every day at this time you have to do it right here, right now. Get out the scale, measure this, water that, stir this, do that. So take your time with it and be patient, and I think you're going to enjoy it and you're going to be completely pleasantly surprised, as I was, that just how simple it actually is. So thanks for joining me today. I'll have some more videos coming up pretty soon on the sourdough starter process and how to make the sourdough sandwich bread and maybe how I do my pizza crust. I don't know. We'll just see how I feel and how much content I can get out this month in April. So thanks for joining me today, and thanks for all of my subscribers for hanging in there, and welcome to all of my new subscribers. I'm happy to have you and see that the channel is growing. It's been a slow, steady process, but hey, that works out just fine. So thanks again, and farewell, Homestead family, friends, and neighbors from the Cozy Cottage Homestead.